it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Snow Much Fun and Den Sweet Den. So I've stamped out the 3 baby bears that I'll be using with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on some Nina Solar White cardstock. And I'm just going to quickly color all 3 of them exactly the same. I want them to be polar bears. So I'm using W00 and W1. I'm going to put their light source on their faces, keep those nice and bright, and do the shading down their backs. So I use the W1 to lay that in and then blend it out with the W00, and I'm letting that fade into the white. For the middle bear, like I said, I want to keep his face light, so I'm going to do his shadows in the opposite direction. There's not really going to be a light source on today's card anyway, because it's not really a scene card, but it will have kind of like a highlight in the center. So where I'm going to place these bears, it'll make sense too for that light source to be on their faces. So I'm just quickly coloring in the 3rd little bear, adding that shadow and blending it out, keeping them nice and light so they have that dimension but still look white. And then for their muzzles, I'm going to use W1 and W3 and W5. So I put a little bit of darkness at the bottom edge with the W5, blend it out with the W3, and then I'll finish with the W1, and that will just give them a little bit of contrast since they're very simple images to color. I went over their eyes with a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen to make those come back to life. And then I decided to give them some rosy cheeks just to have a bit more color, so I used the RV11 first to lay that in. And then I'm going to go around the edges of that with the RV10 and soften that into the white of their fur. And then I'll trim these out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm taking a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock and I'm going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks. I'm starting with Cracked Pistachio in the center, just doing kind of like a circular motion and building up that color. The benefit of this cardstock is because it has that coating on it, it makes it super easy to blend on, but it also makes it a little bit harder to build up the color, so you have to work a little bit more. Then I'm going to take peacock feathers and I'm going to come in from the outside edges and take that right up to the cracked pistachio. Just go over the very edge of that so that I can get those 2 to blend. And then I'm just grabbing my scrap paper that I use to trim out my images from, and I'm going to just hold that in place so I don't get my fingers too inky. Then I'll go back to my cracked pistachio and blend over the transition, add a bit more color, and just smooth out that blend. And I'll just continue to work back and forth until I have a look that I'm happy with. Then I'll bring in my darkest shade, which is Blueprint Sketch, and that one I want to use to really highlight the edges of this panel. So I'm going to work that on the corners especially, and then just a little bit on the 4 sides, just so that there's a bit more of a darkness and it kind of creates a vignette. So it's really going to pull the eye of the viewer in toward the center because that's where the light is coming from. So once I'm happy with that, I'll go back to my peacock feathers, darken that up, and then back to my cracked pistachio and just lighten up the center again and work back and forth building up those layers. You can see that now that ink is really starting to build up and get a lot deeper and richer in tone, and that's what I want. I want to just continue to layer those inks until they're really vibrant and beautiful. And then on my last layer back down, I'm just using a lot less pressure and really concentrating on getting those inks to smooth out and blend nicely together. So once I'm happy with that, I wanted to create some splatter effect with some liquid stardust. This is going to add a pearlized sheen that is going to look super pretty when you tip it into the light. So the way I like to use it is to pour it onto a small acrylic block and then flick it off with a paintbrush. That way I can kind of control a little bit where the droplets fall, and also make sure that I get some super fine droplets as well. I want to have a mix of sizes. And then I'm going to take some Copic opaque white and repeat that process as I'm trying to create the look of snow. That's the theme for this card. This is actually for our current Lawn Fanatics challenge, and we're supposed to resemble the weather, and here it is completely snowy still, so I went with a snow theme. So again, I'm just flicking that Copic opaque white off and creating that snowfall, and then I'm going to set this aside to dry. In the meantime, I'm going to work on my sentiment, and I'm going to be doing a heat emboss sentiment. So I'm coating my cardstock with a EK Success powder tool. This is Lawn Fawn's Blue Jay cardstock, and I'll be stamping on that in Versamark ink. It's just a clear sticky ink that works great for heat embossing because it really grabs a hold of that powder and holds it in place until you can heat set it with a heat tool. So I'm stamping the Love Ya and Much. Those are both from Snow Much Fun. And I just pressed down really lightly to make sure I got a nice crisp impression. If you press too hard, it can make your letters get kind of fat. So I made sure to just press super light, coated that with some white embossing powder, tapped off the excess, and then I'm going to grab my heat tool. I'll let that heat up off to the side for about 30 seconds, and then I'll bring it to my cardstock. I like to heat it from the back first and then bring it to the front and make sure that all of that powder is melted and shiny and white. Once that dries, I'll grab a microfiber cloth and brush off any of that remaining powder so that my cardstock looks nice and clean again. While I have my Misty out, I'm also going to create an insert for my card since I'm using a dark colored cardstock. I'm stamping a sentiment from Long Distance Hugs, and I'm using Blue Jay ink to match my cardstock. And I'm also taking another of the bears from Snow Much Fun, and also the two little hearts are from that stamp set as well. So I'm stamping that down a couple times to get a nice impression, and then I'll set that aside and move on to my card base. I'm going to attach that insert to the inside of my card first, and I use the outside in stitch rectangle stackables for that so that it gives me that nice little bit of a border of the cardstock, which I think really finishes off nicely. There's that die. I also used it for my background, so it'll create the same effect on the front. So I'm adding some liquid glue to the back of that panel, and then I'll just make sure that that's on there nice and straight and press that down into place. Then I'm taking the S, N, and W from Finley's ABCs, and I die cut those out of some white cardstock. I'm trying to spell the word snow, but instead of using the O, I decided to use a snowflake from Stitch Snowflakes. So I'm going to line those up on my card front and kind of figure out the placement first, because I really want to make sure that the letters are nice and centered on the card. I don't want them to be, off to the left or right. So it was really important to lay those out and make sure that they were going to be spaced correctly before I adhered those down. And from here, I did make a little bit of a mistake. I got interrupted by one of my children. They came into my room and were talking to me, and I continued making the card because the sun was going down, and I didn't realize that I was not filming. So I had all of my images placed on the card, and I was so upset. So what I did was I just pulled everything back off except for the word snow. That was already too dry, so I had to leave that, but I just glued those down really simply. So now I'm coming back and kind of recreating the card for you, but that's why there's kind of some little tears on that panel, because I had to pull off all of those images so that I could recreate the finished look of the card for you. So I added the 3 little baby bears. The 2 on the ends are kind of holding up the S and W, and then the one down below is kind of sleeping beneath them. And then I took that "Love Ya Much" and I die cut that with the Everyday Sentiment banners and trimmed those down, and I attached that above and below so it says "Love Ya Snow Much." So I'm just adjusting those baby bears so that I have them kind of holding those letters like I wanted them to, and then I'm going to finish the card up with a bit of Stardust Stickles. So I'm going to coat the word snow with the Stardust Stickles to create that really frosty look to go with the theme of this card. For the snowflake, I didn't want to completely cover it, so I just did the center and then the little circles at each end. And then I filled in the W as well. And that's just going to add to that bit of sparkle that you're going to see along with that liquid stardust that's in the background there. You can kind of see it when I tip it into the light, how much sparkle that adds. And there is another peek at the inside. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. I post new videos every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of the products that I used today, you'll find them listed and linked in the description bar below the video. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos that I thought might also interest you. So you can click on either one of those to check them out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.